Hi again, nice to see you all back on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about pitch accent again. This is the third video in this series. In the last video I suggested that pitch accent doesn't seem to play any fundamental structural or organizing role in Japanese. This makes it quite different to stress in English, which plays a number of very important roles. So here we have to consider the possibility that the importance of pitch accent is basically lexical. Now we spoke about this in the last video. If a phonetic characteristic is lexical or phonemic in a language, that means that altering that characteristic within the context of a given word can turn word A into word B. I just want to say up front here that I don't know very much about the history of the Japanese language, and I don't know where pitch accent comes from. What I mean by that is this. Chinese has tones. Anyone who knows anything about Chinese, any form of Chinese, knows that Chinese has tones. You can take one word and by altering the pitch contours of the tones in that word, you can turn it, in principle, at least into some other word. Many people believe that Chinese works this way because Chinese syllables, which overwhelmingly don't end in consonants today, used to end in consonants, but that each consonant was accompanied by a characteristic pitch contour in the syllable in question. Because each different syllable final consonant had its own characteristic syllable pitch contour, the final syllable itself came to be redundant. People could understand what was being said even if it was to be dropped, right? Even if the speaker in question were not to use it. And as a consequence of that, dropping those consonants didn't have any effect on the ability of the language to function. That is apparently why Chinese has tones. Now, I can't tell you how Japanese pitch accent has come to exist in the way that it exists. Other people would have to fill in the blanks there. I simply don't know about these things. That to one side, it's fairly obvious to anyone who spends a bit of time with a pitch accent dictionary that Japanese has large numbers of minimal pairs, as we would call them in phonetics and phonology, that are only distinguished by their pitch accent patterns. There are certain well-known examples that will help clear that up for anyone who can't understand what I'm talking about. So we'll look at ame, which means rain, and ame, which means sweet as a noun. And if you're talking about verbs, you can look, for example, at the verb that means to buy. This is kau. And then the verb that means to keep or to have an animal, which is kau. Now, if Japanese pitch accent is used to distinguish words that would otherwise sound exactly the same as each other, that would make it pretty useful, wouldn't it? Of course, we already touched on this in the previous video, but I wanted to save a more detailed discussion for this video. This argument seems to be fairly reasonable, fairly respectable, but actually, I don't think it's a very good argument. Think about these sets of English words. Toad, 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 road, 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 right, 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 there, 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 here, here, heel, heel, bear, bear, and bear, meat, meat, new, new, band, band, beat, beat, bread, bread, buy, buy, and buy, scent, scent, and scent, sight, sight, and sight, see, see, and see, chili, chili, and chili, course, and course. None of these words here, none of these English words that I've just mentioned is particularly exotic or unusual. These are pretty bog standard English words. We use them a lot, they're very common, and we just don't have any difficulty understanding which word is being used under normal circumstances. You might be able to contrive sentences where it wouldn't be clear which word from amongst each of these groups you were using. But under normal circumstances, not only can we tell them apart, we tell them apart all the time without thinking about it, without even being aware that these words have homophones. The reason we can do this, of course, is that we have A, grammar, and B, context. Take, for example, the words bread and bread. Bread, i.e. the stuff you eat, is obviously a noun. The other bread is either a past tense or a past participle. So the way in which these words function in sentences is going to be quite different. Secondly, at the risk of stating the very, very obvious, context is going to make it pretty clear what's going on. Bear in mind that the list I gave you up above is very, very partial. There are plenty of other word pairs that are true homophones. Think of horse and horse, for example. These things are everywhere in English. Do you ever get confused by this stuff when you're speaking English, when you're listening to English, when you're dealing with English? No, neither do I. If English speakers are capable of understanding which word is being used when a word has some sort of homophone in the language, I'm pretty sure that Japanese people would be able to do the same thing in their language. And of course they do this because pitch accent doesn't always split words apart and make them clearly distinct. I remember when I was getting interested in pitch accent, I went to my online pitch accent dictionary and I looked up 3 words that I considered to be interesting. These 3 words were shibo, shibo, and shibo. Now I pronounced all 3 of them the same way there. I pronounced them all with the heiban pitch accent pattern. And the reason I did that is that when I looked them up, I found that they were all indeed heiban. These 3 words are true homophones. They're not distinguishable at all in terms of the way they are pronounced. Do the Japanese care? Obviously not. They have other pitch accent patterns that they could use in principle to distinguish these words, but they don't because they obviously, subconsciously speaking, don't care enough. This just doesn't create a problem for them. And all of these words are relatively common. If you type shibo into your phone or your computer, you'll see that there are a hell of a lot more words that come up that can be read in principle. Shibo, most of them are exotic and not used very often, but these 3 are relatively common. Now it's very difficult for me to speak definitively here. I've never researched this and I've never got out of my way to actually look up the rigorous scientific research that has presumably been done on this subject. But I don't think Japanese actually uses pitch accent that much to allow its speakers to tell apart words that would otherwise be homophones. If somebody knows something to the contrary, I would be very happy to hear from them. They are very welcome to write something to that effect in the comments. That to one side, my gut feeling is that Japanese is not, as a language, particularly reliant on these pitch accent patterns, simply in terms of telling words apart. If you say ame ga futteru instead of ame ga futteru, Japanese people are not going to think that you're saying sweets are falling out of the sky. You're just going to sound a little bit odd to them. So pitch accent is starting to look like a bit of a useless curiosity. It's starting to look like something that is cosmetic, not functional, something that is decorative, not useful. And this brings us back again to our earlier observation that it is overwhelmingly not taught rigorously. In fact, that it's not really taught at all on the whole by otherwise perfectly capable and conscientious native Japanese teachers of Japanese. If even the natives don't correct you on this stuff, when correcting you to some extent is their job, surely it can't really matter. Let's be honest, who cares about this stuff? The other thing you have to bear in mind is that pitch accent, the underlying system, is quite complex in all of its details. If you really dig into it, it's not that straightforward, it's not that easy to learn. Some of it's quite easy to learn, but some of it is really quite complex and difficult to memorize. And we all know that learning Japanese isn't exactly a walk in the park. Is it a good idea to spend time thinking about this stuff, to spend time learning this stuff when Japanese already takes up so much time? The last 2 videos have basically constituted the case for the prosecution against pitch accent. Taken together, they might be taken as arguing that pitch accent is essentially a useless distraction. Certainly if you're somebody learning Japanese as a foreign language. Clearly the Japanese are attached to it or they wouldn't use it. But should we care about it? Probably not. That, in a sense, is the point that's been made by the last 2 videos. Is that true? Well, maybe, maybe not. In the next couple of videos, we're going to be listening to the case for the defense. In defense of pitch accent, that will be the theme of the next 2 videos in this series. So that's it for now. That's it for today. See you next time. Ciao, ciao. Bye, bye.